So this leads us then to the question, and already to the answer to that question: how and why did states dismantle the traditional order and build a market-based society in its stead? How and why? Why? Because they were hoping to increase their power within their societies, that the kings would be able to govern much more directly and with much less resistance into every aspect of life of their societies. The guild sets the rules and the wages. What if the king could do it instead? The nobility taxes itself. What if the king could tax the nobility? How did they do that? By taking on board the ideas of the Enlightenment, by adding on Enlightenment-based justifications to the absolute power of monarchs, thus making that power a whole lot more absolute than it had in fact been to begin with. Because you can't really say you have absolute power if everybody does what they want because they have ancient rights that allow them to do so. And enlightened absolutism then becomes the ticket for changing the role of individuals in societies to make them into legally free individuals that can become wage earners and consumers, and mainly because they are set free, they're kicked out of the traditional households that they had belonged to. So rather than having apprentices and journeymen who are under the authority of the master and of the guild, if you abolish the guild or if you break its power to govern itself and make its own laws, no more journeymen and apprentices, just citizens who all can be taxed the same, who all are also free to maybe set up their own craft workshop if they're good enough. No more people belonging to the soil, no more serfs, no more dependent farmers. But if the people don't belong to the soil anymore, yes, they can buy their own farm, they can set up their own shop, but the noble, the lord, also doesn't have to pay their way anymore if there is a famine, if there is a harvest failure. And very important in the end is to make land a commodity. That not just means that the nobles are put in a situation where they can cash in on their patrimony, but they can also just walk away and become capitalist entrepreneurs. They can become merchants and manufacturers. More likely, however, at this stage is the merchants and manufacturers, the non-nobles, the commoners who got rich already, can buy land that used to belong to the nobility. And the highest irony here is that in many cases when they buy the land, they buy the rights to the service of the unfree peasants. So at which point, if you thought you had, if you were a peasant, if you were a serf, and you had it bad under your noble lord, if that noble sells out because the law is changed and allows him to treat that land as a commodity and sell it, if your land is sold to a commoner, to a rich merchant, then you're really in trouble, because the merchant will send his lawyers first thing and say, find out what rights we have against those peasants that the noble didn't fully use. Let's see how much more money we can get out of them. So in many cases, the people are told, you are now free, and that's going to cost you. So enlightened absolutism doesn't really do much to make government look more legitimate in the eyes of most common people, but it is in the interest of the merchants and the rich commoners. So how do the people feel about the Enlightenment and these ideas of freedom? Certainly there is much in that appeals to them. For instance, if you're not particularly happy being an unfree farmer or craftsman, the freedom to do something else in your life, to change your station, that sounds pretty good. And if you are in a dependent relationship to your employer, if you're an unfree person under a master of the estate, of the vessel, of the workshop, or what have you, and you have a bad master who is using his authority in an abusive manner, freedom from that arbitrary authority also sounds pretty good. And if you've read some Enlightenment philosophy, and if you have found out that the claims that kings make, that only they can really understand what government is and how it works, is not true, and that you are capable of understanding what government should be doing, and therefore you should be allowed to participate in running that government through elections, through being allowed to voice your opinion in the public sphere, then that kind of freedom also sounds pretty good. However, for the broad majority of the populations, what kings and merchants are doing in the name of the Enlightenment, in the name of freedom and reason, is clearly detrimental. An encroachment upon traditional rights of working people and the farming population violates most people's sense of morality. So they come to they defend the assumptions of the moral economy, in many cases with bread riots in the cities or with strikes, against attempts to dismantle them. Nonetheless, there is some overlap with the merchant's vision when it comes to the idea that maybe if you didn't have to serve your guild master, then you could do better for yourselves. So, but the people don't just buy into the ideas of the Enlightenment as the monarchy and the merchants understand them, but they make up their own mind. And with it, and the people, the 95% of the population that we're talking about, of course, is not a monolithic group. There are many different subgroups here. Notably, one of the most marginalized ones are slaves and ex-slaves. And the people who have met them and have started to understand something about the nature of slavery. And the most likely group for that among white Europeans is the maritime working class, the sailors and dock workers who've had occasion to meet Africans like Olaudah Equiano, both when they are enslaved or after they gained their freedom. So for a slave, freedom has a whole nother ring to it yet again. It means primarily to be free from slavery. And equality has a very radical edge to it, because it doesn't just mean that you're equal to your, the question is not just to be equal to your lords and to your king, to deny them that they're special and that they know things that you can't possibly understand, but it means to take the foundations of the system that keeps you as a second-class human being, as a slave, and say, there is nothing legitimate about it. It doesn't hold up to the demands of freedom, equality, and reason that are fundamental to the Enlightenment. So in the hands of people who think about slavery, who suffered under it, who were exposed to it, the ideas of the Enlightenment turn especially sharp-edged. And it's not an accident that Tom Paine, one of the most powerful writers, who lays out the case in the American Revolution for why you get to govern yourself without a king, is a British working-class radical from London. He's somebody who moves in the poor man's version of the coffee house, in harbor bars and radical Republican societies, in the same kinds of places where you might have encountered Olaudah Equiano. Now, I'm not saying, because I don't know this, that Tom Paine knew Olaudah Equiano, but they're moving in the same circles of people who are the most radical in saying that equality is not just something that concerns white people, it's a universal thing. And democracy, that you don't just have the right to be considered or heard or consulted when it comes to affairs of state and government, but you want to have a say. You are entitled to a say. You get to elect the people who make the decisions. So if the mainstream of the people's radicalism is represented by George Washington, a former government official for the British, somebody who fought for the British in the 7 Years' War, then the radical edge is represented by Toussaint Louverture. If George Washington is what we consider the face of this age of revolution for the North American case, do consider Toussaint Louverture as a reminder of what was possible and what was beaten back by the joint response of both reactionaries and revolutionaries in this age of revolution. Because there is not just the French and American revolutions, but the age of revolution is rounded off by the Haitian revolution. Now, Haiti was the heart of the French sugar industry, of the sugar plantation industry. And Toussaint Louverture, shown here on horseback as the leader of the People's Army in Haiti, that drove the French out and that established a republic with a constitution, with democratic elections and so forth, in the most valuable slave colony of the New World, belongs into that group. And if we look at Louverture, if we look at Haiti, then suddenly what appeared to be the limitations of this age of revolution, well, it wasn't about democracy, it wasn't really about racial equality, kind of evaporates, because we can say, no, actually it was thinkable, it was doable, it was thought and done in Haiti. And the reason why the Haitian revolution failed is not because Africans can't handle freedom and equality and democracy. The Haitian revolution failed because, like the Russian Revolution 120 years later, in 1917, the world responded, the rest of the world responded by sending their armies to beat it down. So suddenly the British and the French, who had been fighting each other tooth and nail to the death on European battlefields, suspended that to take care of this menace first, because what you really can't, it's bad enough that your own white Europeans are revolting against your benevolent rule and have these ideas of rights and democracy. But how much worse is it for non-Europeans to do the same thing? Where does this end? So the limitations of the revolutionaries to say it has to end somewhere. We have to draw a line, an artificial line, where we say this is as far equality and democracy and rights will go, and it can't go any further. That's an interesting moment to keep watch for, to see how far people are willing to go. And the reason this comes up, the reason why they're saying, no, we're not going there, is not because they couldn't have, or it was unthinkable, because slavery was just such a fact of life. But the reason that this question came up was because people asked that question. People who were on the other side of the line asked that question and said, well, I'm a slave, I'm an African. Do you not think that I am free, that I am rational, that I am capable of making up my own mind and enjoying the same rights as you? And then you had to answer that question. And unfortunately, many of the revolutionaries answered that question in the negative. So that doesn't diminish the radicalism and the revolutionary nature of people like George Washington and the movements that these people led. But it puts a different light, it puts a different perspective on their accomplishment. So we'll talk more about this issue of what the state is, how it is justified, how people asked to renegotiate the boundaries between power and legitimacy in these revolutions when we get to the American Revolution. But for now, for the rest of the week in this class, let's make sure we look at the 7 Years' War, how it was fought, and how the people who signed that treaty that ended it tick, how they think, so that we really wrap our minds around what these empires, what these monarchies were, and what reasons the North American colonists might have had in wanting to rebel against them. So That's that. Goodbye.